This is exciting, isn't it?
Here we go, guys, in 5, 4, 3.
Here we go.
It's time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
Thank you for good programming, and I appreciate the content and really enjoyed every moment.
It's a privilege to have you on your station, and it's good stuff. It's very educational.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Hey, it is Thursday, March 27th. There's a lot to talk about, but I have to. I don't know. I mean, I understand about making mistakes. I have something that I refer to as Monday mouth, where it's like your cheeks, your lips, your tongue are all swollen and things just don't come out quite as clearly as you would wish. But I think when you're the Associated Press and you are doing the news at the top of the hour, I would like to think that there is some sort of supervision, there is some sort of editing, there is some sort of somebody, not just one person writing copy and reading it in a vacuum, but somebody else who can weigh in on that. A submarine has sank. Hello? I am far from the grammar police. But I believe, young lady, that submarine sunk. A U.S. submarine has sank. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. I know lots of times I get texts from you guys about the Associated Press news and things they say that get under your skin. I will tell you most of the time during the show, over the news breaks, I'm busy getting organized for the next guest. And don't give it 100% of my attention most of the time. So maybe I only noticed this because it was the beginning of my show and I'm just sitting here getting ready to go. But that, to me, was like nails on a chalkboard. Hiya, Pajwani, go with God. I love you. Next time, have somebody look over your copy. Because a submarine has sank doesn't make you or the AP look very good. Okay. Now, next time, every time I have Monday mouth, you guys can text in like, what are you talking about? You didn't make any sense. I know. Okay. It is another day. It is another day with calls for Pete Hegseth to resign. Did you see some reporter actually ask Trump about that? And Trump was like, well, I thought it was Mike Waltz. I mean, Mike Waltz was the one who apologized for it. Like, why are you guys going after Hegseth? I like Hegseth. He's my guy. I thought it was Mike Waltz who did the boo-boo thing. He's the one that said he took responsibility. Why are you going after Hegseth? Well, maybe because Hegseth was the one that posted all the classified information about the attack in Yemen. The F-18s, the drones, the Tomahawk missiles, exactly the ordnance they were going to use, exactly where it was going to be used, exactly what time it was going to be used. Stuff that you would normally expect to be classified information. Yeah. And Pete Hegseth is still out there. Pete Hegseth is still out there trying to tell people there was nothing classified. There was nothing classified. Tammy Duckworth, whose social media post I read yesterday, where she said he's an effing liar. If that ain't classified, nothing's classified. Are you talking? Excuse me. Which branch of our military, what ordnance they were going to use, when the attack was going to happen, how it was going to unfold. If that kind of information isn't classified, what is? What is? Tammy Duckworth was on last night with Rachel Maddow, and once again repeated her demand that Pete Hegseth should resign, that Pete Hegseth is a liar. Listen to this.
I think he should resign because he put those pilots in danger. If you look at the text chain, that's my response was immediately after I read the actual text chain that showed him putting up on this unsecured platform, the drones are going to strike. And then he put down exactly how long it was going to be until the F-18s were going to be over the target area. If anybody had compromised that chain, those pilots could have been in danger. And that's why I was so upset. And I used my Army language in that text because he is the guy that's leading the military, and he put those pilots in direct danger. And by the way, if I were our allies, if I were the UK or any of our allies, I would think twice about sharing intelligence with us in the future, because we've shown that our Secretary of Defense, our national intelligence community, does not know how to safeguard classified information.
Let me ask you about the classified portion of this. Obviously, there's potential criminal liability here, whether or not this was classified information. But we've also now had these blunt assertions from the president, from other White House officials, from Mr. Hegseth, saying that there was nothing that was classified or that could be construed as classified information in the text. We know what Mr. Goldberg has published. We know that the NSC says that they've verified that this was the actual text chain. Does it seem to you that this is classified information?
It absolutely is. Any type of targeting information, sequencing of the attack, that's automatically classified. And that's why I called him a liar, because he's been saying there was no classified information. And then this text chain gets published, and we see clearly that it is classified information and that it directly put those pilots in danger.
Yeah. She's not the only one calling for Pete Hegseth to resign. This is a compilation. You're going to hear Representative Raja Krishnamurthy, Representative Jason Crow, who's the Dem from Colorado, Congressional Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries, and Democratic Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy. Krishnamurthy, Crow, Jeffries, Murphy, back to back to back. Listen to this. Compilation.
All of these people, once they realized the type of information that was on this chain, if they were responsible with that type of information, what should they have done? And who do you think is most culpable in terms of their behavior here?
Well, that's just why I say they should all lose their jobs, because they needed to have spoken up. As soon as he put that information on there and posted the information about the sequencing, what the strike was going to be, what platforms were going to be used, Tomahawks, drones, F-18s, for example, someone on that chain should have said, hey, this is not the correct platform. Let's switch over to the SIPRNet. And not a single one of them spoke up. That is egregious dereliction of duty in terms of their jobs. They needed to have spoken up, especially those who are in the intelligence community. And don't tell me that they don't know that. You've got Tulsi Gabbard, who, claims that she's a combat veteran and she has all this experience. You've got the CIA director, who at one point was also the DNI at one point in the previous administration. These people know better, and not a single one of them spoke up, which is why they're all culpable.
That was Tammy Duckworth. Now you're going to hear Raja Krishnamurthy, Jason Crow, Hakeem Jeffries, and Chris Murphy banging the same drum. Listen to this.
Using the DOD's manual as well as the executive order in operation today with the Trump administration, this text message is clearly classified information. Secretary Hegseth has disclosed military plans as well as classified information. He needs to resign immediately.
It is outrageous, and it is a leadership failure, and that's why Secretary Hegseth, who undoubtedly transmitted classified, sensitive operational information via this chain, must resign immediately.
Ultimately, the buck stops with the President of the United States of America, which is why I made clear to President Trump yesterday in my correspondence that the Secretary of Defense should be fired immediately if he's not man enough to own up to his mistakes and resign in disgrace.
Pete Hegseth needs to resign. There needs to be accountability right now, because every hour that goes by with no accountability, American credibility all around the world is being destroyed.
So you got to hand it to the Democrats. For once, they're taking a page out of the Republican playbook. They are all on the same message. They are all calling for Hegseth's firing or resignation. It's the same message. This is what we always get frustrated about. It's like, everybody sort of goes off on their own. Well, I think this is important. Well, I think this is important. No, we're going to stay on message. And whether or not Hegseth is forced out, this is what the Democrats need to do on every issue, on every vote, on every screw up by a member of DOJ or the Trump administration. Focus on one thing and bang the drum. That is how Republicans break through to the low information voter. They hear it here, they hear it there, they hear it everywhere. And by maybe the 8th or the 10th time they hear something, it soaks in. Hey, that Hegseth, he kind of messed up. Why didn't they get rid of him? The phone lines are open, 773-763-9278, 773-763-9278. People are weighing in. It says they have a department in the Trump administration that they call the Department of Defense. That's where they think up all the stupid excuses and defenses for incompetence that they come up with. Okay. All righty. And yes, this probably did violate the Espionage Act, for those of you texting in about that. Classified information being circulated in an unsecure way, operational details being circulated on a third-party app, and Signal is encrypted, so that's why a lot of journalists like it. But do you really think the encryption on Signal can withstand Russian hackers? As one of our soundbites said yesterday, Malcolm Nance, former intelligence guy from the military, you don't think those phones are compromised? Those personal phones? You don't think they're compromised? And today they're starting to say, well, these phones, the Signal was already on them, so that they came from the Biden administration. It's Biden's fault, don't you know? The fact that they did this, and they got caught because they were so incompetent they didn't even question who was on the chat. And what I counted yesterday, there were only 12, no more than 14, but I think it was 12 numbers on the chat, and they couldn't take the time to just do like a roll call and make sure everybody knew who everybody was. The arrogance and the carelessness are staggering. Just staggering. And Donald Trump's first reaction, I don't know anything about it. Nobody told me. And then when he apparently he told his aides that for the time being, they are to defend everybody involved in this. But if the media, if it really becomes a problem, maybe somebody will have to go. But for now, we're going to stand by all of them. For now, we are going to defend everybody. And then we'll just kind of see how it plays out. Like today. So you're going to call for Hegseth's resignation? Wait a minute. Michael Waltz is the one that took responsibility and apologized. What are you doing with my boy Pete? What are you doing with my boy Pete? Let's go to the phone lines. Ed's on the line from Palos Park. Hello, Ed. Thanks for the call.
Hi, Joan. Great commentary here, but I would say, what do you expect from a group of weasels, Ed Weasel, me and Trump, and they were going to try to alibi and blame. How does Biden figure in this thing? That's unbelievable.
Yeah, you take a set of facts, you twist it into a pretzel, and at the end of the pretzel, you find Biden. That's how it works.
Right. And if you really want to get nauseated, pay attention to some of the comments made by these Fox News toadies. Absolutely nauseating, the conclusions they reached, which have no truth or whatever, just trying to blame everyone but themselves for what happened, terrible. And I have one other comment, Joan, if I may, regarding Pam Bondi, okay, making the Gestapo statement about people that are caught vandalizing Teslas or whatever. Now, would that only be Teslas that she would send people or try to send people to prison and whatever? Or would that be a Chevy Equinox or a Ford or whatever? Or is there only Teslas?
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess if you vandalize a Chevy Equinox, then you're just guilty of vandalism. But if you vandalize a Tesla, you're guilty of terrorism.
Right. And could somebody please tell me, is Tesla part of the United States government?
Yes, I think it is, Ed. Yes, it is. There's the Department of Tesla.
Yeah, sounds like it. So more made up hocus pocus. These people are so low. I mean, we have to get strong because this is getting way out of hand already. And the more Trump gets away with, the more he's going to push. What about the reparation that he wants to give those convicted felons? Did you hear that one?
Yes.
He wants to pay them.
Yes, he does. Yeah. The people he pardoned for their violence on January 6th, he feels really sorry for them, Ed, and he thinks that taxpayer money should be used to cut them all checks. Reparations. Mm-hmm. Yeah, reparations. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Forget about the people that are hurting. Forget about medical research and give it to these more violent morons.
Pediatric cancer.
Right. Like I say, it's got to stop. I mean, it's getting way out of hand. So, but anyhow, Joan, thanks for taking my call.
Thank you for the call, Ed. I appreciate that. We had a request on the text line. I just referenced what Malcolm Nance said yesterday. He was on Stephanie Miller's show. Jody Hamilton, her former producer, was filling in for Stephanie. Malcolm Nance is former military intelligence, and he was off the charts upset about this sharing of military information, where the attack was going to be, who was going to carry it out, what the munitions were going to be. He talked about the security of phones. Bottom line, there isn't any. There isn't any security on your personal phone. You know your phone listens to you. I mean, good grief, we all know that. Anyway, on the text line, I got a request from somebody who hadn't heard what Malcolm said yesterday, if we could share that again. Lady B has it right now. Go ahead and play it, Lady B.
This is the greatest breach in U.S. intelligence history. And here's why, Jody. I'm going to tell you why. Because if their phones are compromised, they're private phones, and I must assume they're compromised. Because we would have done it. We probably are doing it. But if their phones were compromised, they were carrying them into top secret meetings, the White House, their meetings with their boo, wherever that phone was, it is a transmitter, and that's what mobile phones are. When the mobile phone era started, we could not vacuum everything, so we started selective targeting of key individuals so that we wouldn't have to sift them out of the giant vacuum cleaner in the sky. This man, all of those people, their phones are compromised. Everything they have ever said in secret was either monitored or they know about or can get access to. We are so screwed here.
Malcolm Nance putting a very fine point on this whole Signalgate disaster. Let's go to Dave, who's on the phone line from Hoffman Estates. Hi, Dave.
Hey, Joan.
How are you?
Hey, I was just thinking on this Hegseth. With the last time there was a case of president's cabinet going rogue or renegade, if you recall, was Ollie North and the weapons for hostages. Remember when Rip Van Reagan was sleeping in the Oval and that with the jelly beans and that? And supposedly did not recall.
The Iran-Contra thing?
Yes, ma'am. Did not recall. Well, this is kind of like history kind of rhyming itself now with this one when Trump's trying to say, I didn't know nothing. You know, I knew nothing.
Yeah, Reagan didn't know anything about it either. Yeah, and we believe that. We believe that. We believe that.
And the final straw will be when Hegseth goes up to testify, if he does, if he'll jump into his old army uniform just like Ollie North did that time.
Well, I don't know if he's going to be called to give any kind of testimony because Pam Bondi already said that she doesn't think that the DOJ needs to do any investigation about this whole signal controversy. No, we're going to take a pass on that one, kids. Yeah, thanks, Pam.
Unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, unbelievable. But anyway, I just thought you'd find the irony in with this going on with these guys going renegade, just like North and them guys did. So.
Yeah. Yep. We have precedent, don't we? Thanks,
yes, ma'am.
Dave.
All right. Be well.
Thank you. I got this text. Hi, Joan. Isn't the reason Trump chooses the people he does because, one, loyalty. There's no way any of Trump's appointments could get a job like they have without Trump, so they're all ferociously loyal. Two, they're disposable. Trump can blame any of his appointees and fire them to shed blame, parentheses, see Michael Cohen. Given one, and two, why doesn't he fire Hegseth? Here's what I think. I think he doesn't fire Hegseth. Remember, when Hegseth's nomination was still afloat in the Senate, it was widely believed that well, first of all, everybody thought Joni Ernst would tank him before he even got out of the committee. There was a tsunami pushing him to remove his name from consideration. He refused. He doubled down. He was more aggressive and outspoken than ever, got Elon Musk to threaten Joni Ernst, and all of a sudden, a nomination that looked like it was on its deathbed suddenly comes roaring back. And Donald Trump admires that. Donald Trump sees himself like that, as somebody who, in the face of being counted out, roars back to victory. And Pete Hegseth, everybody says J.D. Vance is sort of a mini-me to Trump. I think Pete Hegseth is far more of a mini-me to Trump. And I think Donald Trump is sitting back right now and watching this play out. And if it goes away in the next day or two, then they will have just survived, and they will have learned that they can outweight the Democrats and outweight the media. So that's why I'm so pleased that so many high-profile Democrats are screaming loud and long and repeatedly that Pete Hegseth must go. If they keep up the pressure, eventually Hegseth will be more of a liability than an asset. But it's not coming yet. Let's take a break. We'll be back with more calls and more news of the day right after this.
Facebook. Message us. Instagram. Follow us.
Twitter.
Tweet us.
They keep me connected.
Let's get social on the socials. WCPT 820.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Want to join the conversation?
I'm going to say exactly what I think here.
Got something to say?
Everyone needs to hear what I got to say.
Call Joan now at 773-763-9278 and join the conversation. Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT 820.
Yes, for the first hour of each day, except for Friday when it's the first half of the show, we are taking your calls and reading your texts and talking about the news of the day. The news of the day is still dominated by the fact that all of the people who should have known better, security people, intelligence people, defense people, used an unsecure third-party app to plan an attack on Yemen. Just saw him. We just saw him go into the building where his girlfriend lives. Let's take that building out. Okie dokie. As Tammy Duckworth said, anybody who could break that encryption, anybody who could plant malware on those phones could potentially have known exactly what was coming. And those F-18 fighter jets, they could have been ready for them. They could have shot them out of the air. They could very easily have done that. And ordinarily, heads would roll. Ordinarily, this wouldn't happen. And the only reason we know it happened is because they were foolish enough, careless enough to include a journalist in their little text group, Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic, who has published the entirety of the text chain because he was called a liar. Oh, there was no classified information. Okay, that's where you're going to be? Then let me publish exactly the screenshots of the text chain that the national security spokesperson already said was legitimate. It was a legitimate chain. They don't know how he got on it, but they're gonna figure that out. And also, now people are saying, how many times have they done this? How many times have they used this third-party app to convey the kind of information that should have been secured at the highest levels? And the most logical reason why they would have used it is not because it came pre-installed on their phones. It's because Signal doesn't keep a record. After, I think it's a week, maybe 2 at the most, everything that you communicate on the Signal app disappears. So there's no record, nothing that can be subpoenaed, nothing that needs to be transferred over to the National Archives. Let's go back to the phone lines. Mike is on the line from Indiana. Hi, Mike. Thanks for the call today.
Hi, Joan. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm great. Hey, wasn't this the crew that said, I think it was during the 2016 campaign where Trump said, we're not going to tell anybody anything. You know, they say we're going to bomb this country on this date, and then we're going to bomb here, and then we're going to do that. We're not going to do that anymore. Remember him saying that?
Yeah, well, not that exactly, but yeah, the gist of that.
I guess that's just sailed, huh?
Yeah. Did you see what Hillary Clinton posted on social media? She posted, but my emails. Remember how Donald Trump said she should go to jail because she used her private email address to communicate with people about things that were not classified?
Yes, absolutely. And kudos to you for having Malcolm Nance on. He's a great resource. I just hope he's wrong with his prediction on bombing Iran.
I hope he's wrong about that too. Malcolm Nance, for those of you who don't know, also said in that same interview that he thinks within 30 days we will be militarily attacking a country. and most people believe he is talking about is sometime in the next month bombing Iran.
He said in that interview that they had 7 B-2 bombers, the stealth bombers, in Diego Garcia. And he says never before have they had that many bombers there. And he was saying that he thought it would happen next week. And so I'm just hoping that his prediction is that they're going to do that to distract from Signalgate.
Well, I don't know what Donald Trump will do, but that you hit the nail on the head. That is his technique. He does things that are outrageous so that the media drops whatever story he wants them to drop and goes after this new shiny object.
Yes.
So I think, you're absolutely right in expecting whether it is bombing Iran or something else. It's honestly, I'm surprised he hasn't come out with a big outrage yet because he's kind of, usually as soon as the story he doesn't like breaks, the outrage follows on its heels. And so I'm kind of surprised it hasn't come yet.
Well, the tariffs go into effect next week, and if the stock market crashes, I know he pays attention to that. And if there's a big blow up over the tariffs next week, then he can set aside Iran for a little while and concentrate on the tariffs. But either way, it's going to distract. But hey, good for the Democrats to be beating that drum. They should keep beating it no matter what. They can walk and chew gum.
One would hope. I would hope they could walk and chew gum, though, sometimes we get our expectations for what they can do seem to be a little disappointed. But this time, I hope it's going to be different. It's absolutely going to be different. I know it's going to be different.
Fingers crossed. Thanks, Joan.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for the call, Mike. Let's go to our good friend Jim, who is on the line from Chicago. Hello, Jim.
Hi, Joan. For the last 2 months, the only coherent word that Trump can say, and it must be at a big thing in the Oval Office, because they come in with the camera, he gets his camera shot. Tariffs, which nobody on earth understands, or it's like the supply chain. They don't understand that. And if you remember, Harry Truman had that famous little thing on his desk, the buck stops here.
Yep.
Well, with this outfit, I know where the buck stops. It stops with the Heritage Foundation Project 2025, because all they're there to do is enrich themselves. Yeah, when you think about the CDC laying off these people, well-paid jobs, they're laying them off left and right. They're throwing us to the wolves. And their argument always is, we want to balance the budget. We look at the deficit.
They have to save money, Jim, because how else are they going to be able to cut those checks, those reparation checks, to the January 6th insurrectionists? You got to find that money somewhere, Jim.
Well, I know that Musk is too cheap to go into his pocket, so let's get it from the Treasury. And even Trump is supposed to be the billionaire. He won't go into his pocket to do it. Even on the private, even if he wanted to do it, he'd do it privately and slip him some dough. I mean, if he had any class, that's what he'd do. But he doesn't have any. He wants to go to the Treasury for it.
Yeah.
But look at the CDC. Think of it. We just came out of the worst pandemic in 108 years. With the information was faulty, and they're going to cut that. In the meantime, you got measles. You've got different.
And you've got kids in Texas ending up in the emergency room with liver damage because Bobby Kennedy Jr. is telling people that take vitamin A, that it will either alleviate the symptoms of measles or it will prevent you from getting it. Vitamin A is toxic if you take too much. And there are children with liver damage now because of Bobby Kennedy.
I guarantee he took too much a long time ago. He must have took a few bottles of it, because if he's not brain damaged, I don't know who is. But I haven't seen anybody in this cabinet that makes one iota of sense. There's no continuity. There's no they haven't explained what is Project 2025. What if it was implemented? What would it look like? We had 81 million Democratic voters for Biden, Joan. I don't know. I know he despises Democrats because they were going to put him in jail on several occasions. Well deserved, put him in jail, but that's no reason to. Because he's mad about being put in jail, he's going to make the rest of the country suffer. Anyway, Joan, I'm going to go on, but it's just absurd. It's just too much. It's too much to take.
It is insane. We live in insane times.
Insane village. Thank you, Joan.
And as Charlie Sykes writes at the top of every one of his newsletters, we are not the crazy ones. You are not the crazy ones. Don't ever think that you are the crazy ones. We're going to take a real quick break. We're going to be back with more calls and texts after this.
Podcasts of Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, YouTube, and Amazon. Just search for Joan Esposito.
Hey, looking for a winning team on a winning station? You found it right here on WCPT 820 AM. Join the marvelous one, Dan Marver, the palacious one, Paul Shivari, Sports on the Couches, Mike Mercado, and yours truly, Devin Tingle, every Sunday at 9 p.m. for the Sports Cubicle, where the inmates run the asylum. And the boss, well, they yell at us on Monday morning because we're working overtime. Looking for your late-night dose of sports talk radio? We're here. Join us on the Sports Cubicle, Sunday nights at 9 p.m.
Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Don't turn that dial. Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now.
A fair balance where the facts come out.
On WCPT 820.
We are talking about the news of the day, Signalgate still predominating. We are also reading your texts and taking your calls. Let's go to Oak Lawn right now. Nancy's on the line. Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Joan. How are you?
Good, and you?
Not good. I am sick and tired. I am disgusted. I am fed up with the Democrats.
Oh, I don't know, Nancy. Ordinarily, I would agree with you, but I think that they are rising to the occasion when it comes to Signalgate. I mean, they are speaking out loud and long, not letting this one go.
No. May I finish?
Sure.
I sound like a broken record, but I will continue to say it because nobody's listening. I get emails all the time with all these, what do they call it? What do they call it when you have to click off what if you're for or against or whatever?
Like a poll?
And they're always, yes, thank you. Like a poll or whatever it's called when it's on paper. So will you vote for the Democrats? You know what I'd like them to put down as another choice? What other choice do I have? Because I am not being represented by these people. They have continued this undemocratic two-party system. We've been ruled by this same system since the beginning of the country. It's going to be 240 years in a couple of years that we've followed this system. Nothing's been changed. Nothing's been fixed. I'm told, there's been amendments, there's been this, there's been that. No, it's still the same. Have they gotten rid of money? Because that's the real trouble we're in. They promised me when I first started voting, and I'm old, I've been voting for over 50 years, we've got to get rid of money out of politics. We've got to fix the all this other stuff. I could go on and on, but all I'm saying is nothing's changed. Money in politics, worse than ever.
Yeah.
Worse than ever. And
I know, and so many people acknowledge that and talk about how we need campaign finance reform and how we need to undo Citizens United. But it's either it is too big a hill or it's just talk. Nothing really changes.
And so now the billionaires are in charge because they haven't done anything. And here we are. And then what really aggravates me the most is their excuses. And when they screw up, like they always do, like on November 5th, don't tell me that was a free and fair election. And they won't even look into it or fight anything or audit anything or nothing. Won't recount anything. And then they turn around and blame the voters. They never talk about voter suppression. They never do anything about it. And the cons get away with everything. And what do you think is going to happen now that this felon is in our White House for the second time? I can't believe he made it in there in the first time. I could have beat him with two simple words. I could have beat him. And I know 100
Nancy,
other people.
I appreciate your passion, and I know your frustration. I share much of your frustration about the money in politics, and I thank you for the call. I've got to get to other callers. I am running out of time. Let us go from Oakland to Chicago. Ron is on the line from Chicago. Hey, Ron.
How you doing? Yes, Bobby Kennedy is also telling children to take cod liver oil, which also
That's the vitamin A. Cod liver oil is a strong source of vitamin A. That's why he's recommending cod liver oil. That cod liver oil is a heavy dose of vitamin A. I guess he didn't bother to explain that part, and the fact that vitamin A can be toxic if taken in too large an amount. There are certain vitamins that we don't just expel. Certain vitamins that we take are stored. If you have extra, you store it in the fat in your body. And those are the vitamins that can be toxic, not the B vitamins. Basically, you take too much B vitamin, you might get a little upset stomach and then just pee it all out.
All right. Well, that's good. And Attorney General Pam Bondi has said that what was on the signal chat line is unimportant because the mission was successful and the world is safer for democracy. I wonder how many emojis she got from Trump for that one.
Yeah, really. That was part of what I thought was really unprofessional. After this building was bombed, if you actually look at, I know the original Jeffrey Goldberg article for The Atlantic was not behind a paywall. When he got ticked off because they were trying to call him a liar and printed the whole thing. I don't know if I'm a subscriber now, so I don't know if that's behind a paywall or not. But it's really clear what's going on, and it's just so out of bounds.
Okay, all right, thank you, Mary.
I got a text from somebody who has military experience at the highest levels. And they said that there is no way you could say that this text stream did not have classified information. This person said they didn't want me to read the text on the air, but they said I could speak about the gist of it. This is somebody who has been involved in our government, been involved in secure matters, and they said the idea that they're trying to sell that this wasn't classified is just ridiculous. It absolutely, without question, was classified material. And the only thing that, like somebody like Hegseth could have declared, if you're a high enough government official, you can take classified material and just declare it not to be classified. But Hegseth didn't do that. He didn't do it. And for him to say over and over again, I mean, this is the Pete Hegseth that refused to back down when he was accused of having a critical problem holding his alcohol. And, oh, by the way, there was a woman who said he drugged her and raped her. Yeah, that Pete Hegseth who refused to withdraw his name from nomination after those allegations, those credible allegations came forward. Oh, he was also accused of mismanagement. 2 veterans groups, small veterans groups that he led, both got rid of him as their leader. And both of them were in deep financial trouble when they got rid of him as their leader. Fine human being. So he's doing what has worked for him in the past. And that is to take a stand and just say the lies over and over and over again. Say them passionately. Say it like you believe it with all your heart. And chances are you'll get through it, right? Let's go Ken is on the line from Rogers Park. Hey, Ken, thank you for the call today.
Hi, Joan. I want to comment on Malcolm Nance. He's doing the same thing. He's giving Iran a heads up, we're going to bomb them, so they're going to be on high alert. And insult to injury, he says, there's a buildup of B-1 bombers on Diego Garcia. Iran goes, maybe we should go to Diego Garcia and bomb that. Malcolm Nance should know better. Loose lips sinks ships.
Do you think that he said what he said so that the military, if indeed there were plans to do this, because of the exposure, they would have to scrap those plans?
I don't understand the question.
Making something public. Like the reason leakers make things public is because they want the things that they're leaking about to not happen or not be done. Do you think, because Malcolm Nance isn't a stupid guy, do you think by him saying that there's going to be some sort of big military action in the next 30 days, he's putting the government on notice that, hey, everybody's going to be looking at you, so maybe you ought to, rethink this? Do you see what I'm saying? Do you think that's possible, that he did it on purpose?
I don't know about that. He just shouldn't say anything being a military man. And to say that he saw a buildup of B-1 bombers on Diego Garcia, loose lips sink ship. Malcolm Nance should know better. Let me know if I'm wrong or not.
That's why I think he did it, though. Daniel Ellsberg with the Pentagon Papers wanted the Vietnam War to come to an end, so he released all these government documents that showed that politicians who kept saying, we're so close to winning, that was nowhere near the case, because he wanted the government's course of action to change. I have to believe that that was part of, because you're right, Malcolm Nance does know how it works. He does know how the system goes. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But it's an interesting point you raise, and I'm glad you called. Thank you for that, Ken. Let's go back to the text line. So many people are commenting about the signal gate. Let me just maybe summarize, rather than in the time we have left try to read everybody's texts. The gist of the texts seem to be that people acknowledge, you understand, that people like Hegseth are trying to gaslight us. They are trying to convince us that what we read and what we saw wasn't what we read and what we saw. And again, you can't really fault Pete Hegseth for taking this tack, because he has been successful with it in the past. Can you imagine being nominated to be head of the Department of Defense? By the way, Donald Trump offered him the job before he was vetted. Donald Trump didn't go to his people and say, hey, I'm thinking about Pete Hegseth. I really like him. Look into him. Because I guarantee you, if Donald Trump's people had found out about the alcohol problem, the financial mismanagement problem, the rape accusation, he would never have had his name put forward. But they didn't. Donald Trump, offered the guy the job. And then the guy got the job because he refused to back down. It was like, who's that one? Alyssa Farah. She's now a commentator on CNN, but she used to be in the Trump communications office in the first administration. I believe it's either her or the woman who used to be the chief of staff for Melania said that Donald Trump told them directly to their face that even if something is untrue, if you say it over and over and over and over and over again, people will believe it. Doesn't have to be true. It just has to be out there everywhere they turn, and they'll believe it. Somebody did text in about Malcolm. That one I'm going to share. Malcolm stated in his Substack and on the morning show that this is all known data. He's not spilling any unknown information. There are people out there tracking the comings and goings of freighters and airplanes in military traffic lanes. Those were the ones talking about the increased traffic to Diego Garcia. So I guess, I subscribe to Malcolm's Substack, but I did not read his explanation for his remarks. So I am trusting the texter. One more quick. And this is something we've talked about. If indeed Pete Hegseth resigned, who would we get? Who would we get? Trump wants a loyalist, not an expert. Would he bring back Mike Flynn, who he broke out of jail? Charlie Kirk, he's loyal. Who would he bring back? It might be worse. Let's take a break for news. And when we come back, we are going to chat with our good buddy, Eric Zorn, right after this.
You're the only voice of reason on the radio.
You give me hope.
Having listened to you every day.
Thank you for your clear insight.
Always felt a little bit smarter.
I listen to you every single day.
I keep coming back to this station, and thank you for what you do.
On WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Because facts matter. You're listening to WCPT 820.
It's time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
Joan, as always, exceptional work from you. From, your TV days all the way up to today. You're truly exceptional, and thanks for this great show you have.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Joining me is one of my favorite people to talk to. Eric Zorn is here. It is Thursday, and on Thursday is another edition of the Picayune Sentinel. How are you, Mr. Zorn?
I'm good, Joan. Nice to talk to you.
How was New Orleans?
It was really fun. We were down there for Mardi Gras, and then we stayed a little bit of extra time down there. We saw a lot of parades, ate some really good food, saw some jazz. It's a great town. We actually drove.
Really?
Down there. Yeah, it's. We've often been going during the starting with the pandemic. We just got out of Chicago for a couple of weeks every winter just to work. We would just take our laptops and go. We've been going to Savannah. And then we looked at the map and realized that actually driving to New Orleans, although it's further south than Savannah, which is in Georgia there, it's actually a little bit closer by car.
Really?
To go straight down the Mississippi, basically, yeah. So anyway, we went to New Orleans, and we rented a little tiny house down there, and it's a great town. The weather was fairly cooperative. It was sort of 60s and 70s. I was kind of warm up here at the same time, but yeah, no, it's a nice place. I really enjoyed it. I don't know if I'd want to live there. I kind of like Chicago better, but it's a good town.
Now, you said you went to hear a lot of jazz. That's not really your genre, though, is it? Aren't you kind of a fiddle guy?
I'm a fiddle guy, and in fact, when I took my fiddle down there and I looked for some old-time musicians to get together with and play, and just couldn't find any. I posted on various message boards and just couldn't find anyone who wanted to play tunes. So I played by myself.
Oh,
but yeah, we went to see, when you're in New Orleans, when in Rome, do as Romans do. We went to see some sort of Dixieland style jazz, the New Orleans jazz, and then also some more contemporary jazz. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
I not too long ago, I had dinner with Terry Hemmert, who traditionally likes to go to New Orleans to celebrate her birthday. And Terry and her friends were at that restaurant where the shooter showed up. And they were, I guess the shooter turned out to be a disgruntled employee who had been fired by the restaurant, but walked in with a gun and just started spraying the room. Terry and her friends were in a sort of a private room behind the main dining room, but bullets came through the wall, and a woman that was sitting right next to Terry got hit. I mean, it was just, to hear her talk about it is just, even recounting her story now gives me goosebumps.
This is not the New Year's Eve shooting where the guy drove the truck down Bourbon Street.
No, this was a restaurant shooting. It was a mass shooting. It got a lot of attention.
I'm remembering this now. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I'm glad that you and your lovely wife had a delightful time. New Orleans always used to be a super fun place to go.
It still is. I mean, the people down there really know how to party. We went to a parade that was basically focused on dogs, as the Barkus parade, and people were people brought their dogs out in costume to watch other dogs in costume go down the street, and the people really know how to have a good time down there. And there is a lot of security there, and there's a lot of people, armed guards, armed military guys in fatigues. They take it very seriously now. This could have just been for Mardi Gras, but the streets had these were massively blocked off so that no one could drive down them. Some of them down in the French Quarter, so it felt safe. But of course, I'm sure the people, I'm sure Terry Hammer felt safe in the restaurant. So you never know.
Well, and
anymore, right?
Eric, even several years ago, I think when my daughter was a senior in high school and was going to study abroad, and my friends were like, is she going to be safe? And I looked at them and I said, okay, you tell me, where in the world can you guarantee that it's going to be safe? I mean, who would have ever looked at Uvalde, Texas and said, oh, don't go to Uvalde, you want to stay safe? You can't live your life like that.
No, you can't. And, well, you can also, but you can keep your head on a swivel, which I kind of did when we were in the French Quarter. Just looking around, making sure that, if a car comes streaking down the street or someone opens fire, that I'm kind of ready for it a little bit. But, after a while, you're just you're there and you realize that the odds are really, really, really good that you're going to be safe. That these things happen way too often, but they don't happen that often. It's not like an everyday thing, so... But no, we had a great time, and then we drove back on the day that all those tornadoes, struck the South. They struck Alabama, and we drove part way. We waited in a coffee shop while the storms passed, and then we drove a little further. And it was pretty tense, but we threaded the needle up the Mississippi and came home. So.
Oh, you could have gotten some really good tornado footage. You could have been, on the WGN weathercast.
One of those storm chasers.
Yeah, exactly.
The car upended in a ditch. No, thank you.
Oof. Yeah, no, thank you. So there's so much. Well, there's always so much that I enjoy reading in the Picayune Sentinel. I love the way you write. I like the way your mind works, Eric. Because, no, seriously, because I read a lot of people, and there are a lot of people I admire. But you... especially when somebody attacks you, you are always so thoughtful and cogent in your response. And, it's not like you fired something off and somebody attacks you and you're like, oh, God, I should have thought more about that. You do things in a thoughtful way so that when somebody tells you, you're full of it, you can say, well, but you know what? Here's what I think. Here's why I did what I did. Here's why I wrote what I wrote the way I wrote it. And that was as much as ever on display in when you recounted your exchange with one Mr. Thrasher from Northwestern University. And your exchanges with him go back 4 years. Talk about that, if you would.
Yeah, well, I wrote a column right after Adam Toledo was shot by Officer Eric Stillman. If you remember that story in the middle of the night.
I do.
A 13-year-old Hispanic boy was with a gang member. I'm not sure. I can't remember who he was with exactly. But it was sort of the middle of the night, and gunshots had been heard, and the police showed up. And Adam was running away from police with a gun in his hand, and the cop is chasing him down an alley. And Adam Toledo, the boy, he comes up to a fence. He throws the gun behind the fence to kind of get rid of it. Then he wheels around with his hands up, and the police officer shot him because he thought that the kid still had the gun in a moment of panic. Obviously, a regrettable and tragic mistake on the officer's part. He did not see the boy was unarmed. This was a big story, 4 years ago.
And there was actually video that came to light afterwards that showed the way the young man threw the gun behind the fence. There was no way for the cop to see that he was getting rid of the gun. The cop just knows the kid's got a gun in his hand. All of a sudden, the kid turns around and raises his hand. It was tragic. It was a tragic.
It was definitely tragic. And I wrote a column even before the video came out, and I said, look, let's before we leap to conclusions and make this boy to a martyr. And the demonstrators were having, drawing murals of him with angels' wings and a halo, and acting like this. This is murder. This cop just murdered a brown-skinned child. And I was just like, let's hang on a second. Let's not assume that a 13-year-old can't be dangerous. Mm-hmm. And I wrote that, there are 13-year-olds who commit heinous crimes. It's not a big,
and
it doesn't happen all the time, but it does.
When it's dark in the middle of the night, it's pretty hard to get an accurate age on somebody.
Right. I'm not sure. I don't know what his stature was or what the officer thought. And clearly, in the video as it went on, you could see the officer was really wrecked by this. That he wasn't defiant.
He was a highly decorated officer. This wasn't somebody that had a bunch of complaints against him for excessive violence.
Yeah, but in any case, I kind of wrote a column that amounted to, wait a sec, before we turn this officer into a murderer and this young man into a martyr, let's wait until we see the video. Let's wait till we see what happens. Well, this caused a firestorm, and it wasn't just Stephen Thrasher, who's a professor of journalism at Northwestern, but there's a lot of people who were very critical of me for seeming like I was really cold and harsh about this kid, like I was analyzing without appropriately empathizing with his family and his friends, and that I wasn't writing it in the sense it was tragic, and I also wasn't writing it as though this is yet another example of a cop shooting somebody for no good reason. A cop shooting an unarmed kid, and I said, let's wait a sec, let's sort this out before we turn anyone to a villain or a martyr here. And Thrasher was one who posted on social media that he said, this is disgusting, that this journalist is glorifying child murder. He's going to cancel his subscription to the Tribune. So, that was just part of it. And I thought, at the time, well, he's a journalism professor. He's urging people to cancel their subscriptions to the Tribune, calling me an advocate for child murder. I thought that was extremely irresponsible. But I waited until things cooled down, about a month, and I wrote him I thought, very civil, and it was a civil email saying, look, I'd like to have an email exchange with you, if you don't mind, about what a journalist ought to do in a situation like this. Isn't it our role to ask questions, to hold up our finger and say, wait a minute, let's wait till we find out all the facts? And then he wrote back something like, I don't have any interest in talking to anyone who glorifies or makes the murder of children more likely. I don't want to have anything to do with you. And I just thought that was really irresponsible, really non-journalistic, And, I can let that go, let that pass, although he did become a feature in some speeches that I would give about, what happens when you're writing a newspaper column. And anyway, so he became involved in some of these anti-Israel protests, or pro-Palestinian, however you want to put it, protests up on campus at Northwestern, where, again, he's a journalism professor, and was part of a line of faculty members who were obstructing police, who were trying to clear the common area up there. And he's a firebrand, and for sure. And he was arrested and charged, and the charges were dropped and expunged later. But there was a question in my mind, and the Tribune at the time editorialized about this, saying, like, this guy's an activist. He's not a journalist. He doesn't teach about how to report and write stories and look at things objectively and fairly. He's out there trying to stir up trouble, and that's not the role of a journalism professor. And I thought at the time that and I was disappointed, frankly, that I didn't hear from very many people. I know some of the faculty members up at Medill, and I didn't hear from any of them. They went totally silent. I think it's because they're afraid of crossing the orthodoxy up there, which was that he was a political figure, and that any discipline he got or any trouble that he got into was because of his political views. Well, anyway, to flash forward just 2 weeks ago, I guess, he was denied tenure. He was told by the dean up there at Northwestern that he was not going to get tenure. For those who, tenure is a lifetime commitment, lifetime appointment. It's like, you have passed muster with us. We want you on our faculty forever. I think he's late 40s, something like that. So they're talking about another 20, 25 year commitment to this guy on their faculty, and they decided no, thank you. The petitions up there and his letters and his fundraising and everything like that, his appeal is going to be based on this idea that this is academic freedom that he has, that he can say what he wants, and that he's being punished for his pro-Palestinian views. And I don't think that's the case. I haven't talked directly to the Northwestern people.
Well, there were also some student complaints about his teaching and about how he treated people. Though I do recall you mentioning that, he was saying that a committee investigated all that and found that there was nothing there, nothing to worry about. And you weren't the only journalist he went after. This wasn't an isolated incident. This wasn't just I hate Eric Zorn. This was, there was that other reporter.
There's Ben Ryan, who's an independent health and science reporter, and he posted an account of his dealings with Thrasher, and he said, that Thrasher attacked him, ranted at him, be blisteringly rude. He said unleashing unnecessary, unprovoked tirades over email, that he was not professional in his dealings with people. He wasn't professional in his dealings with me, certainly. I mean, I think as a journalist, you want to explore questions. A journalist, one of the great things about journalism, and you know this from your position and your former job as well, that you're exploring questions. You don't go into a story with all the answers. You go into a story with maybe some presuppositions, but you go into there looking for answers. And I thought, well, this is an opportunity for a journalism professor to interact with me about what does a journalist do, what does a commentator do in a situation where they're faced with a story where the facts are still unfolding and the public has instantly rushed to their various sides. That the pro-cop people were like, oh, this was justified, completely justified, and the I don't know if you call them anti-cop people, but the people who are extremely concerned about police violence, which I think we all should be, had all decided already that this was an egregious example of a police officer gratuitously murdering a child. So you have people who just had rushed to their opinions, and that's. The job of a journalist is not to rush to one side and defend it. The job of a journalist is to, I think, sort it out and to say what we know, what we don't know, what are we going to wait for. And I thought this was a good opportunity to have a public dialogue with a journalism professor who might want to talk about the journalistic problem here rather than someone who wants to just immediately rush to judgment. Good journalists don't rush to judgment. Good journalists step back. And they take a look at what's going on, and they try to make decisions based on the facts. The facts matter. You're the slogan of WCPT, that facts matter. So I was really interested in having a civilized dialogue, since the heat had died down, with Thrasher about, well, what should a journalist do in a situation like that? What would he suggest that I write, that a columnist or an editorial writer write in the immediate aftermath of something like that? I think it's a good question, and and maybe I needed to write a different column. I don't know, but put more nuance on it. Certainly, my wife thought that
you said you wrote something that was very important. One of the things that drives me crazy, is whenever there's breaking news, and you see it at the local level, you see it at the national level. Everybody so desperately wants to be first with what's going on. And I really respect the institutions that will constantly remind the audience, look, this is a breaking story. Often when a story is developing like this, sometimes the information that we get first turns out not to be right. So I want you to keep that in mind. We're going to tell you what we're finding out as we find it out, but keep that in mind. That happens so often when there's a big breaking story. The first information about the who, what, where, when, and why turns out to be sometimes wrong on all fronts.
Well, I'll give you an example that I used to throw back at people who were criticizing me over the Adam Toledo story, which was the Laquan McDonald story. And when that first came out, and I make no pretense about being out in front of that story. I didn't pay attention to it at the time, and Jamie Calvin and those people, the journalists who did, I get a lot of credit. But when that story first came out, the official line was that Laquan McDonald had lunged toward the police officer who shot him, and that had attacked him, had a knife in his hand, was attacking him. And when I saw that video, I wrote a number of columns sort of breaking that down almost frame by frame, talking about why that officer was lying when he said that Laquan McDonald rushed at him, why Laquan McDonald was not posing a threat to him, and why that was a cold-blooded act of murder by that police officer. I am not pro or anti-police on something like this. I mean, I certainly respect what police do. I think that they do an extremely important job. I respect how stressful it is. I'm not saying in every instance that they do the right thing or in every instance they do the wrong thing. Clearly, George Floyd, that was murder. Laquan McDonald, that was murder. But the Adam Toledo case, I don't think that it was. And I think that if you look at it, as reasonably and rationally as you can, to look at those things and realize that, we need to wait and find out what do we know, what don't we know. Let's look at the evidence carefully before we decide that someone is evil or someone is a pure victim here. So it is important. And again, I thought it was really, really important that I thought a journalism professor would want to take up that mantle and say, hey, let's have a conversation about it. But he did not. Anyway, he denied tenure. There's a petition drive up there. They want to save him. And I don't think that it's political. And if I thought that they were letting him go because they disagree with him about Gaza, or about Israel, Palestine, the whole thing. If I thought that they had problems with his Middle East politics and that's why they were letting him go, I would be signing that petition. I think that would be really wrong. I don't think that's the case. I think that he had to go. And if you're going to have a journalism faculty, you're going to have a journalism school that you're proud of and that has professors that are teaching young writers, young journalists, the basic ethical tenets of the craft or the profession, then you can't have someone who is just a rabble-rouser on your faculty. I don't think you want that.
And if you are in the limelight, like you and me and Dan Bernstein, you have to be really careful sometimes. I love the fact that you pointed out that all of us have that urge once in a while. I can't tell you sometimes, usually when I get all these texts when I do my show, and some of them are just so insulting and rude. And in my mind, I write a really rude response, and then in my mind, I let it go. And then if I respond at all, I actually try to be more funny and snarky in my responses. But I understand Dan Bernstein used to be on the radio, but somebody accused him of being a bad fisherman.
Oh,
I know.
My God.
Of all the things to get fired for, poor Dan. He had lost his mind.
I want to tell that story because that story is so interesting and it's funny, but it's really pathetic. But to your broader point about people in your line of work and my line of work, but certainly when I was a columnist at the Tribune, I got a lot more in terms of hostility. My readership tends to be more aligned with me. Like it's a self-selecting readership that wants to hear what I have to say. At the Tribune, there are a lot of people who would get my column who disagree with me pretty strongly. But when I would get really nasty notes, one of the things that I would respond, sometimes I would just say, thanks, that was really helpful.
Yeah.
It's like, well, what can they do with that? It's like they can't. That's a nice response, but it makes no sense because usually it's just abuse. But people like to do that, and they don't see you as a person. And I think one of the things that that Steve Thrasher, he didn't see me as a person, and I tried to see him as a person. Like, why did he respond to this? You've got to realize that there are people who are writing, and we come at stories based on a lot of experiences and a lot of questions, and a lot of us have doubts when we're writing whether or we're speaking if what we're saying is correct. But hang
on about the Bernstein story because we're getting really close. I want you to tell the story, but we're getting really close to a break, so we're going to wait till we're on the other side. But along those lines, I agree with you, especially maybe not so much now, but especially when I was on television, there's this weird, people feel like they know you, but in a way, you're also not real to them, because people would say things to me that they would never in a million years say to somebody that they worked with or that lived in their neighborhood. Like, Joan, hey, by the way, your hair really looked bad last week. Or why don't you cut your hair? It's kind of messy. It's kind of unruly. So it was this, I found it was this weird dynamic where on the one hand, they felt that they knew you, but you weren't really 100% a real person to them like the other people in their lives. There was some sort of distance there that allowed them to say things, like I said, that they would never in a million years say to somebody that they really, truly knew. It was a very weird dynamic. Anyway, Eric Zorn writes the Picayune Sentinel. We're going to take a break. He's going to come back, and he's going to tell us the story of WSCR Score Sports Talk host Dan Bernstein when we come right back after this.
Hey guys, this is Richard Chu, host of Chu's Views, weekday mornings from 6 to 8 a.m. on WCPT. For those of you who don't know, we have a digital newsroom anchored to our radio station. Our journalists at Heartland Signal uncover some of the worst extremism from state legislatures, congressional races, and across government in the Midwest. And now, every weekday morning during the 6 o'clock hour, I'll fill you in on the latest Heartland Signal articles, editorials, and sound bites. You won't want to miss it.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Every weekday afternoon from 2 to 5 p.m. on WCPT 820.
I'm joined by Eric Zorn, former Tribune columnist, now the founder of the Picayune Sentinel newsletter. And in today's edition, he tells the story of Dan Bernstein. Take it away, Eric.
Well, before I do, I want to just follow up on what you said right before the break, and you were talking about how you would get these notes about your hair and your appearance on TV. And I have certainly spent enough time talking to Mary Schmeek, my former colleague at the Tribune, and Heidi Stevens, also my former colleague at the Tribune, about the response that they got to their mugshots in the paper. They're the little picture that goes over the columns. And Mary and Heidi both said that they get lots and lots, they did get lots and lots of criticism about their appearance. Your hair is too long, your hair is too messy, all this stuff like that. I told them, I said, you know what? In about 36 years of writing a column with my picture on it, you know how many comments I got about my hair? Zero, not one. I think it is. There's a lot of sexism that goes into that stuff. I wanted to clarify that or talk about that.
Not like, why aren't you smiling better, or why are you smiling so big, or nothing?
No, nothing.
Oh,
nothing like that. Nobody. No, I got called a lot of names, but nothing to do with my hair. But anyway. So the Dan Bernstein story. Bernstein was an afternoon host at the Score sports talk radio station, WSCR. And on March 13th, which was 2 weeks ago today, he went fishing after work, and he caught a 32-inch northern pike off Northerly Island. And he put a picture of himself on what I still call Twitter, X, and with a message with a picture of him holding the fish, saying this was a hell of a fight, and the pike had to be a female full of eggs with all that girth. Okay? Fisherman telling a fish story, big deal. So later that day, some ex-user accused Bernstein of killing the fish, and Bernstein responded that the fish had been released successfully. And then a user with the handle Greg Messenger, who calls himself Christian Conservative, America First, Husband, Father, and Guinness Aficionado. That's his Twitter description. He chimes in to say that the fish was getting ready to go to spawn, but instead Dan Bernstein killed it, and he seems proud of it. And Bernstein replied, I'm gonna have to really edit what happens after this, because there are a lot of F-bombs. But Bernstein goes back into it. He goes, what the entire link is wrong with you? He says, it was released successfully. It took off like a torpedo. Go blank yourself, okay? So the guy writes back, goes, with that dried blood on the gill? Sure it did, Dan, you liar. And so, I mean, these guys are exchanging this on Twitter. And then Bernstein says, like a shot, I never respond to trolls. Questioning my sportsmanship and conservation awareness sets me off, Bernstein wrote. You want to fight? I'm a bad enemy. And then he added an expletive after that. And then the citizen, the Christian conservative America First guy says, yeah, you're a 5'7", 165-pound fat boy. Which, I don't know, is that fat? 5'7", 165? It seems pretty normal to me. Anyway, you really worry me as a bad enemy. By the way, your language continues to give you away as a very base, juvenile person. And Bernstein writes back, instead of just like, hey, setting it aside, he writes back, I think this is where he really went off the rails. Where are you at? I have your address and phone number. You want it all public? Do I worry you yet? And the guy responds, not one bit. I am very transparent about where I live. And this is the final note of this. He says, Bernstein writes, do you want your kids involved? Where are you at? I ain't playing. And so he is challenging this guy to a fight for questioning his sportsmanship. And then he's threatening to dox him, which is the term we use to, giving out someone's home address and phone number and so on, private information, in order to, I guess, encourage other people to hassle them. Mm-hmm. Then he wants to draw the guy's kids into it. And I don't even know if the guy has young children or not, but any time. I mean, that is just way, I mean, it's all pretty out of bounds, challenging someone to a fight. But implicitly threatening someone's children, just way out of bounds. Well, the station suspended Bernstein, and then they fired him, making him, as I put in the Sentinel today, the umpty-willionth person to fall victim to career and reputation-destroying abilities of Twitter. Because there are no editors, there are no filters, there are no 5-second delays. And, we all feel that urge. You and I were speaking about this before the break. We all feel that urge to lash back at someone. When someone attacks you, you want to attack back. It's just like it's a natural. I think it's like almost a mammalian thing, right? You're up on your hind legs. Someone is questioning you, and you have to. Public figures, private figures, everybody. You need to sort of step back from those kind of confrontations, and it's what really makes this stand out is how trivial the original exchange was. I mean, if the guy had like gone after Bernstein's family himself, or called him a pedophile or a racist or something awful, then those are true fighting words. But to say that you didn't properly release that fish, I mean, I know. But I guess a serious fishermen would take that as a pretty severe challenge. But
attacking what he felt it was his integrity, and then accusing him of being a liar. I mean, you can see where how it escalated. And it's hard. Like I said, some of the things that come through on the text line, some of them are so mean they're actually funny, but some of them are just mean. And, the impulse to be meaner in your response is I think, very human, but not one you want to really get into.
Yeah, well, the thing is, there's very little winning in something like that. You don't necessarily even want someone to know that you've gotten under their skin, which is why I like my responses like, good points, thanks, very useful.
Well, the ones, what I usually do when they're like, oh, you're doing it again, you're such a this, you're such a that, then I text back, thank you for being such a loyal listener.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
Because you did this last week, you did this the week before, you always do this. Thank you for being such a loyal listener.
Yeah, right. I mean, what are you going to do? You're not going to change the world one person at a time. I have occasionally tried over the years to write back when people are abusive, but not totally abusive, but really hostile, I will sometimes write back and explain my point of view a little bit better, and not lash back in kind, but just say, explain my point of view and try to, say, well, I understand where you're coming from, but here's how I see it. And every once in a while you'd get someone writing back like, oh, I never really even thought you read these notes, or I thought you had an assistant who read them and threw them out or summarized them or something like that, which is probably true of a lot of really big time media personalities. Although I'm guessing that someone like Royko, who had an assistant work for him, probably did not read all of his emails or.
No, but that was probably just Royko.
But that was probably Royko. But the rest of us, I never had an assistant. I read everything that came across my desk, and I tried to respond to everything that was reasonable. And again, like I said, there were times where I would really try to engage with people. Not that I was going to change their minds necessarily, but just to sort of remind them that there is actually a person behind the byline, and a person who did think things through and who isn't evil, may have a bad opinion. I'm not going to even stand by everything I ever wrote, but I'm just going to say, that this is someone who has maybe we have an honest disagreement, maybe reasonable people can differ on this, but the best way to go at somebody like that is not just to attack them. You're not going to change my mind. You might change my mind if you write a letter, and I've had my mind changed on issues where people will write and say like, hey, you missed this study, and I think this is really important. I think next time you write about this, you should consider this and this. And there are times where, maybe not 180 degrees, but maybe 30 or 40 degrees, soften my opinion, change my opinion, change the direction that I go with an argument. I really believe through all these years of interacting with the public that there are people who are smarter than I am on just about everything I write about because they just have more experience about it. And they can, if they are willing to share that wisdom with me in a constructive way, I can learn from them. And
I have a question for you. I know that on the Tuesday issue of the Picayune Sentinel, you do allow your readers to weigh in on a lot of issues, and I've read some incredibly well-written and thoughtful, I don't know if we want to call it letters, essays, on some of the important things that you've covered. But I notice there's usually at least a first name there. I believe part of the problem comes in when people can hide their identity. I think that people would be a lot more careful about what they send out if their name was attached to it. For instance, on my text line, sometimes people tell me who they are. I'm John from Evanston or something like that. But a lot of times all I get is a phone number, and I'm not about to, pick up my personal phone and call the number to see who they are. But I find that anonymity sometimes lets people be colder and meaner and crueler than they would ever be if they actually had to sign their name to something. I always joke that on our text line, people let their freak flag fly. And that happens in a lot of different ways. But I think the enemy of civility is anonymity. Your thoughts on that?
I think that you have a good point there. And the way that I have managed to keep things civil in the comment threads at the Picayune Sentinel is that I allow only people who are paid subscribers. They have a paid subscriber level. And one of the few benefits of that is that you get to participate in the commenting community. And that, over the last 2.5 years, has really kept, or 3 years actually almost now, has kept things fairly civil. There's people who go off the deep end, but for the most part, people are a little bit invested in keeping it a civilized place. The Tribune, a lot of newspapers have just gotten rid of comment sections because they turned into such cesspools and anonymity really, really contributed to that. And I think that if you were to ask people to put their names onto their opinions, you would find things would be a lot softer. So I definitely agree with that. Now, unfortunately, with something like talk radio, you can't have people identifying themselves by their first and last names because you can't verify at all who they are.
Right.
Someone could call in and say, "Yeah, my name is Richard Roper," and I think, and then issue some awful opinion, and you say, well, wait, I heard Richard Roper on WCPT,
Mm-hmm.
so you can't do that. You can't allow someone to muddy someone else's name like that. But, I also find that even with the voice, you don't get, at least based on my listening, you don't get people who are extremely abusive calling into the station. You get people with odd opinions, certainly, but ones that I would disagree with. But
and I don't mind if people call up and they have a different take on things than I do. Where I draw the line, and what makes some people crazy, is that if somebody joins me live on the radio to talk and they start saying things that are factually untrue, that's when I call them out, and that's when I stop it. Like, wait a minute, that was not how that happened. And generally, I think they know what they're doing, because right away they get loud and they try to talk all over. I'm not finished. I got more to say. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? If you're using my radio show to tell people things that aren't true, you are finished. I'm sorry. So that's when it comes to actually putting their voice on the air, that's, I think, about as bad as it gets. And then sometimes other people get mad at me for cutting those people off, like somehow everyone has a right to these airwaves, no matter what kind of disinformation or misinformation they're spreading. And I try very carefully to disabuse them of that notion.
Right. Well, I think you see your responsibility as providing a forum for factual conversation, obviously with a liberal and progressive viewpoint, but it's not. It's to be useful. It's you want people who are listening to come away with new perspectives, maybe new information and new answers to old arguments, things like that. I mean, that's so putting someone on the air who has a different point of view or a view that's like orthogonal to yours allows you to deal with that and to show your listening audience how to either incorporate that viewpoint into their viewpoint, or maybe to, like I say, move their viewpoint over a few degrees. Say, well, maybe I'm not 100% this way. Maybe I'm 90% this way. There are a lot of issues they're very complicated, and they don't necessarily yield to the orthodox on the right or orthodoxy on the left. So I think it's really those kind of exchanges, those kind of conversations are really good, but they have to be civil. They have to be low volume, and they have to be and factual. So it's a tough balancing act. I don't know how you do it like in real time. That's the challenge.
Sometimes not very well is the answer. Eric Zorn and I have to take a real quick break, and I do want to share with you that I just got a text and somebody said that my hair looks great. We'll be right back after this.
If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Amazon, or HeartlandSignal.com. Just search for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
Hey there, it's Carrie Joy with your Work Money Minute. Today, I want to talk about a couple of things to keep in mind when you're between jobs or when money is scarce. Number one is a reminder that most of us are already tracking. As best you can, only use credit in emergencies. Like a medical emergency or when your only car breaks down. Try your best not to use them for everyday type expenses. That could cost you a lot more over time. Now, number two, if you know you're going to have a hard time paying your creditors, talk to them right away. Have those conversations before you fall behind on your bills. They might accept a partial payment. They might be willing to work out some other arrangement with you while you're in a tough spot. And yeah, nobody likes having those conversations, but it's better than the stress of avoiding creditors later. That's today's Work Money Minute. For more everyday money tips, check out Work Money Media on YouTube. Till next time, this is Carrie Joy saying, take good care.
Hey Google, play WCPT.
Streaming Chicago's progressive talk from TuneIn.
Now back to Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I'm joined by former Tribune columnist Eric Zorn. If you're not subscribing to the Picayune Sentinel, you are missing out on a really fun conversation that takes place every Tuesday and every Thursday. I do have a teeny tiny itty bitty bone to pick with you, Mr. Zorn. Ordinarily, I read your stuff and I'm like, yep, I see it, yep, okay. But down later in the newsletter today, you say that you were surprised and not pleased that the El Paso County District Attorney, James Montoya, said that he was offering a shooter, offering him a plea deal for life in prison without the possibility of parole to avoid the death penalty because the families of his 23 victims didn't want to go through the agony of having this whole proceeding drawn out. Here's why I think that what he did was right. First of all, it is rough on the family members, even if it's an open and shut case and they know that there's no chance that the person's going to get off who killed their loved ones. Going through a trial like that can be really emotionally draining. Also, if he can get the guy to plead guilty, that also saves his state a lot of money. That's why a lot of prosecutors offer these plea deals because it is more economical for their department. They don't have to put on a big prosecution, doesn't take all the time, doesn't take all the man hours or person hours. So I don't understand why you think this should go to trial.
Well, first of all, the guy killed 23 people at a Texas Walmart after posting racist stuff online, and clearly an awful person. I do not believe in the capital punishment. I've written many, many columns opposed to capital punishment, so it's not that. I just feel like his reasoning when he said, and he didn't say that all the families were. He said that a majority of the families wanted to put this behind them, wanted to do it, and my take on this is that the criminal justice system is not the victims against the defendant. It's the people, and that's how all trials are portrayed as. The people against Patrick Crusius, I think is how you say his name. It's the people of Texas against him. It's not the families. So the families may have some say, especially if there's like one family, one victim, and they don't want to go through a trial and they're happy with a life in prison. But you've got different factions here on these families, so that the prosecutor, I think, in that case, needs to make a decision based on what the people, he represents the people. What do the people want? If the people want him to pursue the death penalty, if he thinks that would be what the public would want, not what the families want, the public, because you don't want, and I know other cases that I've covered where the family's insistence on somebody's guilt has inspired prosecutors to go too far. And I'm thinking of the Nicarico case out in DuPage County. And it's just now more than 40 years old, but we can talk about that case where I really think that what happened there was that the family of the victim, the young victim, was so convinced of the guilt of the people who were wrongfully convicted in that case that they drove the prosecutors to do things to cut corners because they felt that like they were in league with that family in ways that they wouldn't have done otherwise. So it's important to separate, and also you don't want someone who someone who doesn't have a supportive family to speak up for them. You want that person to get justice as well. So it shouldn't matter like whether you've got a sympathetic family or not. It's what the defendant did or didn't do, and what and what happened to the victim. It shouldn't matter so much, and that was my reasoning there. And I certainly understand what you're saying, which is like, and again, if all the families said that, if they were all unanimous, then I would say, okay, fine, that's what the families want. But here, I understand there was a divide between those families about what could happen. And in that case, the prosecutor, I think, needs to say, well, I need to make the decision what I think justice demands here. And again, I'm against capital punishment. I'm happy that he did that for that reason, but I don't think that the reasoning that he used was sound.
Well, my sense is that a lot of the motivation is financial. Especially a big case like this where it would drag on and then there would be appeals that they, it's rightly or wrongly. That's why there's a lot of accusations that prosecutors in Cook County used to, if not still, sometimes pressure defendants who aren't guilty into taking guilty pleas just because they're under pressure to get this caseload down and get some of this, signed off on, whether or not the person is innocent. And if you're looking at a trial that's going to go on for a length of time where the outcome is unsure, but if you lose, the punishment is great, sometimes innocent people take these guilty pleas. It's not a perfect system by any stretch of the imagination.
It's not. Well, I do want to circle back a little bit to what you're talking about the cost factor. And one of the arguments that when I would write a lot of columns about the death penalty back when Illinois had it, and it was more of an urgent issue here, was that it is more expensive to put on a capital trial and to run a death row and to handle all the inevitable and mandatory, in some cases, appeals from someone who is on death row. It's much more expensive to do that than to give them life in prison. So people are saying we could give them life in prison and then we have to feed them 3 meals a day for 30 years. If you look at the cost, and Duke University and some other places that did studies, and it's way more expensive to put someone to death than it is to put them in prison for the rest of their life. People don't believe that, but it's true and it's been shown over and over again.
That's interesting. Why is that? Because of this appeal process and what it costs?
Yeah. Yeah, because of the appellate process and because of the cost of running a separate death row unit, but the cost of putting on a capital trial and the cost of some of the appeals I think are mandatory. Some of them are they have to go to various levels of review and you want that in the system. You want there to be reviews. You don't want somebody put to death on Monday and then executed on Friday. You make sure that you've done it right so that all these levels, all the legal time that goes into that, and then again the cost of running an execution and the cost of creating a separate death row. It is a cost savings. They are going to save money in Texas. This is going to save them a lot of money. You're right about that. That's definitely for sure. Again, I don't think that ought to be the primary motivation of a prosecutor. I know we live in the real world, but I would think that prosecutors would be able to say, well, my job is to do justice, and it's somebody else's job to figure out how we're going to pay for it.
Yeah. Well, you make a good point. I don't necessarily think the prosecutor in this case can be faulted for what they've done. And if there are family members, if I was a family member in that situation and I objected, I would make sure that the prosecutor knew that I objected. I would make sure that the prosecutor understood that I was going to be very public with my objections and put a little pressure on them to make a different decision. That's just me. I'm cranky.
Yeah, but I think it's important for the process of justice to feel as though it is blind, that it is guided by the law and by precedent, and is not too inflamed by emotion, because emotion can get in the way of justice. As I've said to people before, there's a really good reason why victims' families are not on juries.
Yeah.
And
apparently journalists. Have you ever been seated on a jury? Journalists don't get seated either.
No, I've never been. I've been called for jury duty many times, and they always reject me.
Yeah, me too. And there's something, I don't know what it is about my name or my voting registration or my Social Security number. I get called to jury duty more than anybody else I know. For a while, it was like twice a year for like 3 years. And never, ever have I gotten on a jury ever?
Yeah, most of the time I've called, I sit there all day and then they send us home. I mean, I've been through that, the voir dire process where the attorneys examine you. I've done that like three or four times, but just about every other time I just sit in the waiting room.
Yeah, couple of times I've made it to actually a courtroom and then gotten tossed. And I have to tell you that I think I make a really good case. I think I would be a terrific juror. And
I think
any lawyers out there, if I'm ever in your jury box, you should insist that I be on your jury. Okay?
I think the fear is that someone with your prominence, and maybe even mine at the time, was that we would be too influential.
That's exactly it. Lawyers have explained it to me. This idea of outsized influence. And also, you're very articulate. I'm reasonably articulate. And if we believe in something, we argue for it. We explain why we feel that way. We try to make others see where we're coming from, and they don't want that either. They don't want somebody that could potentially influence others. So we're out of luck, kiddo. We are
I think that's the case.
Seriously out of luck. Eric Zorn, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for the times when you fill in for me. Our audience really loves you.
Really fun, Joan. Thanks a lot. We'll talk soon.
Yes, we will. We're going to take a break for news. Be back with more after this.
Remember when you get to work to hop over to WCPT820.com or the TuneIn Radio app and stream The Stephanie Miller Show. Weekdays 8 to 11 a.m. on Chicago's Progressive Talk, where facts matter. WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive.
Quite frankly, I get most of my news from you.
Joan Esposito.
Y'all ready for this?
On WCPT 820.
I am welcoming back Professor Marjorie Hershey, political science professor at Indiana University, Bloomington. And as I told my girlfriend this morning, Marjorie, that you are one of my most fun guests because we have an interesting conversation and you are always surprising and fun in what you have to say. I just thought, I'm telling somebody else I'm complimenting you behind your back. Why not share it with you?
Well, that's very kind of you. I appreciate it.
Well, we always have fun together, though I don't know how we're going to have fun talking about Pete Hegseth, who so far is hanging on to his job, but the pressure is not going away. Now we're down to the anonymous sources, defense officials saying that, what he did was egregious. But Donald Trump still seems to be in Hegseth's corner. How do you see this? First of all, let's look back at what happened and the fact that in the Atlantic magazine, we now have pretty much the entire supposedly private signal chat that was inadvertently shared with the editor-in-chief of Atlantic Monthly magazine. Luckily for them, an ethical guy.
Yes, indeed. And I think it's important to keep in mind that Trump is 100% behind people until he's not. Mm-hmm. We've seen this before. We remember some of the people he appointed initially when he first came back into the White House and who just disappeared as soon as Trump decided that they were not likely to get the support that they needed. But there are a lot of people who need to be held accountable for this, not just Pete Hegseth, although goodness knows he is at the top of my list right at the moment. The entire Republican majority in the Congress needs to be held responsible because they're the ones who confirmed this guy. When you hold hearings and you discover that somebody who is a known alcoholic who has had serious problems in terms of sex abuse is being considered seriously as the chief officer of the United States Department of Defense, and you say, oh, well, he's probably okay. There's no reason not to confirm him. And then you discover, well, there was a reason not to confirm him. You might assume that somebody with those alcohol and sex problems might have some lapses in judgment. And this is a really good example of one. I mean, just imagine exposing American service people to attacks when you say, okay, here's where they're going to be, and here are the weapons that they're going to use. Here are their targets. Mm-hmm. And this is the exact timing of what's going to happen. And somebody thinks that it's okay to put that on an insecure communication device against the Defense Department's own rules. It doesn't really take brain surgery to figure that one out. This is really easy. People are being intimidated by President Trump. And the time has come, and I think it will come. I think it's important to keep in mind Donald Trump is a short timer. He is going to be 79 years old. He has never provided an unbiased professional account of his health ever in the past 10 years that he's been in public life. And he will not anoint a successor. He doesn't want anybody else to get that kind of attention. And when he tries to endorse one candidate rather than another, other than the usual endorsements of whoever is most likely to win so that he can take credit for it, he loses as often as he wins. So there's a lane there. There is a lane for a Republican in the post-Trump Republican Party. And I assume that virtually every Republican in Washington is well aware of that, but that they are a bit anxious about stepping forward to it because they still have to go through Republican primaries in order to win re-election. And Trump is at his strongest in the 20% or so of Republicans who vote in Republican primaries. So this is a short-term question. And given that there, with any luck for all of the rest of us, will be a longer term than Trump, it's just inevitable that ambition and various other characteristics of politicians mean somebody is going to start stepping forward.
Do you think, though, they will wait till after the midterms? That's the most logical speculation I've seen, because if they step forward now, even though we need it now, it would be easy for Elon Musk to write some checks and for Donald Trump to trash them and for them to get, at least in Congress, primaried and thrown out of their jobs. But after the midterms, maybe then they won't be so afraid, do you think?
Well, I think that's certainly true, and I think that means that there are going to be a lot of opportunities after the midterm, which means that somebody who positions him or herself now is going to be in somewhat better shape. You've got to get close to the head of the line in order to be able to sprint when the time comes, and it's going to take a fair amount of courage, and it's probably going to take somebody who is in a district that is not so Trumpy, because they won't be quite so fearful about losing their jobs as a result. But that lane is just sitting there, just this big, fat, open lane, and it's just not in the nature of politics for nobody to step in it.
Yeah. What do you think about somebody like Adam Kinzinger, who is still very involved politically, but not with the Republican Party?
I think that Kinzinger and Liz Cheney and others who have been very explicitly opposed to Trump are probably not positioned well to go ahead and lead the Republican Party. I think it's probably going to be somebody who is capable of doing the little dance that says, we are so grateful to President Trump. He was so helpful to us. We really honor his service, but we need to look to the future.
Yeah, that makes sense, I guess. I don't like it, but I have to kind of agree with where you're coming from. Donald Trump's strategy through this whole signal gate has seemed to be, I didn't know what they were doing. Nobody told me. Nobody consulted me. And then when somebody asked him this morning about calling for Hegseth's resignation, he said something that he was like, well, I thought Mike Waltz was responsible. Didn't Mike Waltz came out and he said that he took responsibility. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, obviously he doesn't want to get involved in this and get drawn into this, but he's coming off like somebody who is out of it. Oh, wait a minute, you hate Pate. I thought it was Walz. Didn't Walz go on Fox and say he was really sorry?
I think it's fascinating to me the extent to which Donald Trump can give the impression that he is playing chess in 4 dimensions, that he has such brilliance, that he has great strategic skill. And he doesn't, really. I've said this before, but a columnist had written that Trump's only superpower is his ability to convince people that he has superpowers. We're looking at the Wizard of Oz here, and the curtain is still there, and somebody is going to move it. And I think when you watch Trump for a while, you begin to see that, first of all, he has certain patterns that he uses to give the impression that he's very bright and with it and very strategic. One of them is that he always responds very quickly and very definitively to any attack, but not in a thinking way. What he simply does is use the same term that was used against him, and throw it back on the person who just used it. Like years ago when Hillary Rodham Clinton said Trump was a puppet of Russia, and Trump immediately struck back with, "You're the puppet." Well, a parakeet can do that. It doesn't take any particular strategic brilliance just to be able to reuse the same term that somebody threw at you. But if you watch him when he's in any kind of crossfire situation, you'll see that that is a steady tactic of his. He doesn't have to think. He just reuses the same term that was used against him. And another of his tactics is he doesn't understand what anybody's talking about because he wasn't involved in whatever it is he doesn't like, but he does take credit for whatever it is that works well. He's used this, and this is, of course, time-honored as a strategy for leaders. Take credit for what works, blame somebody else for what doesn't work. He likes Pete Hegseth because Pete Hegseth is pugnacious, and Donald Trump likes pugnacious. Trump does not really have any particular policy preferences. There's nothing much he really wants to achieve in terms of goals other than attention to himself. And that he achieves by intimidation, by bullying, and by using these little techniques that have worked so well for him in the past.
Yeah. Yes, that I'd say that is a very apt description. Political science professor Marjorie Hershey from Indiana University Bloomington and I are going to be right back after this break.
Take Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, with you on the go by using the TuneIn app on your phone. Just search for WCPT 820.
This is WCPT 820, where facts matter.
If you are a financial planner, maybe you're a CPA, maybe you're a divorce attorney, or just somebody who wants to buy a house, you may have trouble going with your previous mortgage company because they may no longer be in business. In the last 2 years, 165,000 mortgage professionals have not renewed their licenses. That's what David Hochberg found. But at the same time, Team Hochberg has added more loan officers. So 165,000 people aren't doing this as a business anymore. Team Hochberg, though, is ready to do your business. They are ready to help you out. They are ready to sit down with you for a free consultation. I've worked with them a couple of times, and I hate the whole process of refinancing. It's just so much paperwork, and they make it as painless as humanly possible. So give them a try. Give them a call, 855-563-2843, or go online, 56david.com. That number again, 855-563-2843, or go online, 56david.com. Lower.com, equal housing lender, NMLS 1124061.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Political science professor Marjorie Hershey from Indiana University Bloomington and I have been talking about Signalgate. I was very pleased that it actually got a name because I think that's important so people now have a shorthand to talk about this scandal. And while the pressure seems to be building that Pete Hegseth should resign, You know, we've seen him withstand pressure before and not capitulate, and there's no guarantee as to how this whole situation is going to play out. But one thing that I am pleased about, and Marjorie is an expert on parties and party politics, this seems to me, first of all, it was described as a scandal that's absolutely perfect for the Democrats because they, you know, this doesn't touch them. It's clearly something that was wrong. Most people seem to understand that it was wrong. But the Democrats are doing something that I didn't think they were capable of. They are all on message. They are all on the same topic. This was wrong. Hegseth's got to go. This was wrong. Hegseth's got to go. Hegseth can't be trusted. Hegseth's got to go. I'm trying to remember of another time when I've seen the Democrats so united in speaking out, and all of them speaking out on the same message in the same way. Do you see that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think that the Democrats are always described as being in disarray, but they aren't always in disarray. We saw that, for example, after President Biden decided that he would step out of the presidential race. It took a grand total of about 4 hours before all of the Democratic state leaders and convention delegates got behind Vice President Kamala Harris. That's not disarray. That's array. And I think that the Democrats have too long been stereotyped as the Democrats certainly are the more diverse of the two parties. And given that we have a system that favors two major parties, a series of election rules that make it very, very difficult to have a multi-party system, which is what most other nations and democracies have, that means that we've got two vehicles to contain the remarkable diversity of a nation of 330 million people who come from all over the world with lots and lots of different economic interests and educational levels and occupational interests. This is a tough thing to do. And I think we should probably be a bit more gentle about saying that the Democratic Party hasn't had its act together. That's certainly true, but it's not necessary for the party to have its act together. There are lots of ways in which the presidential leadership of the last 2 months can be faulted. And the more of them people hear about, the more likely we are to get change. So there's not going to be any one single message that works with all kinds of people across the United States. Some people are going to be more upset about the fact that the economy hasn't gotten to the extent that Trump expected it to much better. Some people are going to be swayed by arguments that have to do with racial resentment. Some people are going to be concerned about damage to educational systems. That's fine. They don't all have to have the same reason. What they have to do is all see the same target. And that's something that I think is slowly coming about, and it will come about more and more. You know that even now, after just 2 months, President Trump's approval ratings have dropped by 10 percentage points. And they've dropped among Hispanic Americans by 25 percentage points. This is not dramatically unusual because that happens with virtually any presidency, but it is more the case with Trump than it has been in any of the recent presidencies. Other than Trump's first presidency, we see over and over again that he's hit lows. With the exception of his previous lows, he's the only one that he's worse than. And it's something that I think a lot of Democrats should take heart about, that a lot of people are not day-to-day involved in politics. That may be unusual for your listeners because they may be, by the very fact that they're listening, people who are unusually interested in and informed about politics. Most people just want to get the laundry done. They just want to make dinner. You know, they're just not that interested in what's going on. And so it takes a story like Hegseth that has legs, and this story has legs. We can tell that, you know, of all the horrors that we've seen out of the last 2 months, this one is still being discussed 2 or 3 days later. Usually there has been such an incredible avalanche of horrors coming out of the White House that they each last for about 15 minutes until the next one comes up. But this one has been powerful enough to last for days, and I don't think it's done yet. So there's every reason for Democrats to unite about this, but the lack of unity among Democrats is not a serious problem, I don't think. It's a the more the merrier situation.
You mentioned something in this answer where you were talking about the fact that we primarily have 2 political parties, and that's not the case in other countries where they have sometimes multiple viable political parties. I have one caller who calls in about once a week to decry the fact that we've never really gotten past 2 viable parties. Why is it that other countries have multiple parties and we seem to be focused on 2? She makes an interesting point. Why is that?
Well, it's really very straightforward. Our electoral rules make a 2-party dominant system almost inevitable. And there are 2 major reasons for that, and we're not in a classroom, and I don't want to bore anybody stiff here, but basically, first of all, we have a different type of election system than most other democracies. In most democracies, they use what is called proportional representation, where a given unit, like Indiana, might have 10 representatives in the House of Representatives, and they are elected statewide. And proportionally, if 60% of the vote for the House of Representatives in Indiana is Republican, 60% of those representatives who are Republicans will go forward to Washington. If the Democrats get 40%, then 40% of that 10 will go forward to Washington. We, on the other hand, use a system that is much more like winner take all. Whoever gets the most votes, even if not a majority, wins the single seat that represents a particular area. Another reason why this happens is simply that the 2 major parties control virtually all state legislatures and the Congress, and they pass rules that make it particularly difficult for a non-major party to get on the ballot. So that if you want to run as, it's interesting that we call them third-party candidates. In virtually every other democracy in the world, the third party is a major party. But we use the term third party as a synonym for minor party because there are only 2 parties that we normally see. I think one of the best examples you can see is that of the Netherlands. Almost all democracies are multi-party systems except us. The Netherlands, depending on what day it is, because the number of political parties can change pretty rapidly, has about 17 political parties that are represented in its legislature. The way that representatives are chosen is that if a particular party gets 10% of the vote nationwide, it gets 10% of the seats in the national legislature. So there's a party in the Netherlands called the Party for the Animals. It got 3% of the vote in a legislative election in the late teens. And so as a result, out of 150 members of the Dutch parliament, it got 5 seats, which is 3% of the total. So that means that there's somebody there to speak for that party, which is an animal rights party, to be able to express its views, and the voters and the candidates for that party get something back for their investment. Here, you get 3% of the vote somewhere, you get nothing.
Right, big bunch of nothing.
Yeah, so as a result, over time, it really discourages third parties or minor parties from bothering to run.
We need to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk to you about how ranked choice voting might change our system a little bit. I'm talking to Professor Marjorie Hershey, a political science professor at Indiana University, Bloomington. We'll be right back after this.
Podcasts of Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, YouTube, and Amazon. Just search for Joan Esposito.
Hey, progressives, this is Richard Chu, host of Chu's Views here on WCPT AM 820, 6 to 8 a.m. Monday through Friday. We have some real challenges in front of us as a country. Since the beginning of this show, I have always felt compelled to bring you the best that I've got. Now, there's always a why to doing whatever we do. So, as we go forward and face these challenges, know this, you listeners are my why. Because I want to make sure I do everything I can to provide a safe, open, forward-moving space that allows you to call, email, text, or just listen to a guy that wants to help you bring out your own championship qualities to truly make this place better for us all. Lofty goal, idealistic, maybe so. But that's my why, and I look forward to bringing you the best that I've got. This is Richard Chu. Stay tuned.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Nancy from Oaklawn, I hope you're listening, because we are dealing with the comment that you always want to make is, why do we only have two parties? And I've been talking with political science professor Marjorie Hershey from Indiana University, Bloomington, about that. And I want to talk to you about ranked choice voting. Here in Illinois, the city of Evanston adopted ranked choice voting, though there's been something of a court challenge saying like one community can't do their voting different than other communities do their voting. So I don't know whether ranked choice voting is going to survive in Evanston. And I believe Oak Park also tried to put ranked choice voting in. But first of all, I'd like you to explain ranked choice voting. And a lot of people say that if we want to take the extremism out of politics, ranked choice voting is the way to do that. So first explain what it is, and then we'll talk about the effect it has.
Sure. There are a number of different ways to count votes that help people in the minority, and by that I don't mean minority races, but just people not in the majority, can have their views more fully expressed in the vote count. The system we have, which is a system of plurality elections where whoever gets the most votes gets the entire seat in Congress that's up or the entire presidential seat, doesn't represent the views of the perhaps up to 49% of the voters who didn't vote for that person. The 50 or 51% who voted for the person who won get their representative. Other people don't. Ranked choice voting would, instead of having us go to the polls and say, okay, we've got 5 people who want to be member of the House from Evanston, which is where I come from, by the way, we will, each of us, be allowed to rank each of those candidates from 1 to 5, 1 being the one we like the best and 5 being the one we like the least. Then we use a simple device, this is really not hard mathematics at all, to add up the totals so that somebody who gets the total closest to 1 is clearly going to stay in the race in the next round. But whoever gets the worst totals, the least votes, the lowest ranking votes, gets kicked out of the race, and then his or her votes are redistributed according to the people who voted for that person's rankings. So if I voted one person as a number 5, then the computer program would look at my next ranking and say, okay, who did I vote for number 4? Who did I vote for number 3? And would redistribute the preferences according to that method. It sounds complicated. It's really quite simple. It can be done very easily by computer. So in the end, people who would otherwise have their preferences thrown out because they voted for the least popular candidate, in fact, can get represented because their other preferences can get thrown into the mix when the recalculations are done. It doesn't necessarily take very long. Computers are a heck of a lot faster than we are in calculating these things. The real problem is that ranked choice voting is not going to be adopted by places that are not Evanston and not Oak Park. Mm-hmm. It exists in some places. Maine has some areas that use ranked choice voting. I think there is a county in Minnesota that does. But just as we can spend the rest of our lives saying, wouldn't it be wonderful if we had a multi-party system, changing the rules is the toughest thing in politics. The rules are the rules because they have favored the groups that are now in charge. And the groups that are now in charge will make sure that the rules don't get changed because then they will lose power. So I think, it's always interesting to debate things like ranked choice voting, but they really are not going to be an answer for us nationally unless we have a really strong uprising of popular opinion, and that just doesn't tend to happen very much in the United States. So the rules produce the outcomes, and the rules, as a result, are extremely hard to change.
Which is also part of the reason why it's so difficult to get rid of gerrymandering. Why would you want to undo gerrymandering, particularly if you are a minority party, when it gives you a leg up? It gives you an advantage. It makes it easier for you to win an election. And both, Republicans are always the ones who are pointed to about gerrymandering, though Democrats have certainly done their share when they've gotten the opportunity. And I think it takes how do I want to put this, Marjorie? Maybe a more mature, a more thoughtful voting populace to say, you know what? Let's just get rid of this and, let's make both parties fight for our votes and let the chips fall where they may. I mean, like you say, it's human nature. You're working under a system that gives you an advantage. Why would you change that?
Exactly, and that's why power tends to continue under the same power holders over time. We have 7 states that do not have gerrymandering, and those are all states where the state legislature does not draw the legislative districts, but rather that power is given to an independent commission. The challenge here is that in most states, state legislatures will obviously not volunteer to give up the power to draw their own legislative districts. So the only way in which we have gotten independent commissions drawing legislative district lines is when the voters have insisted on it using the initiative. The initiative is a progressive reform from 100 years ago that says if a certain number of people, a certain percentage of the population signs a petition asking that a particular policy be put on the ballot for a public vote, then it has to go on the ballot. The problem is, in Indiana, we don't allow initiatives. Many states do not allow initiatives. they allow only referenda, and referenda are ballot issues that the state legislature has put on the ballot. So there are going to be a number of states that are not going to be able to avoid gerrymanders because they don't have the initiative, and the folks who now draw legislative district lines have absolutely no incentive to change that process.
This is a little bit tangential to what we're talking about, but occasionally it pops up here in the state of Illinois that we need to enact legislation so that politicians can be recalled. On the surface of it, it seems like a good thing. You've got a politician who's going off the rails. But in California, where they do have these provisions, it has become a tool for the opposition party to harass somebody who is in office. You know, there was a recall move that was designed not to really recall, I think it was Gavin Newsom, but just, you know, if he has to spend the time fighting it, if he has to spend the money fighting a recall move, then he'll be a weaker candidate and easier for us to defeat in the next election. What do you think of this whole idea of citizen recalls?
Well, I think you're exactly right that the problem that Newsom faced is a problem with any ability to recall a public official. I think we don't need a recall if we all take a bit more seriously our votes for those folks the first time around. You know, anybody who has gotten Donald Trump as president and voted for him certainly cannot be surprised by what they're getting. Trump has always been... But, you know, if they had looked beyond their initial, oh, he seems strong, or he's a billionaire, so he must know what he's doing, and actually looked at what it is that he's done and what he has said he was going to do, we wouldn't need to worry about a recall because we already would have figured out what he was likely to do. He wasn't hiding it. Most political leaders don't hide what it is that they're going to do because they know that that's going to be a problem for them. Recalls are very costly in time. We spend so much more on elections than any other democracy does. We spent something in the vicinity of $25 billion on the elections of 2024. In England, I imagine if they spent $500 million, it would be a shock. And it's not as though that they're that small a country. Mm-hmm. It's that there are rules about how much you can spend on elections. We have an interpretation of free speech that is unusually broad. And the Supreme Court has said because you can't really reach people with your free speech unless you spend money, people's spending on campaigns cannot be limited either any more than their speech. And as a consequence, huge amounts of money are spent on political campaigns. It doesn't have to be that way. For about 20 years in the late 1900s, we had a series of campaign finance rules that actually kept the amount of campaign spending down, more than in other democracies, but a heck of a lot less than it is now. But then, of course, as money often does, it found a way around those rules, and now we're back up into the stratosphere in terms of spending. But if we do permit recalls, then we're just going to have more expensive elections to try to fix what it is that we could have fixed if we had taken the election seriously to begin with.
Well, you know, though, if we limit campaign spending, then how are those poor oligarchs going to get in power? How are they going to have that kind of influence? We can't cut them out of the structure. I'm talking to political science professor Marjorie Hershey from Indiana University, Bloomington. We'll be back with more after this.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Joining me is political science professor Marjorie Hershey. We have been talking about Signalgate. We have been talking about gerrymandering and voting. and money in politics. Speaking of money in politics, who invited Elon Musk to the party, and how do we vote him out of office?
First, we would have had to have voted him into office, which we did not do. His situation is really very interesting. There have been a lot of people around President Trump who have worked very hard to try to find loopholes in which they can take control of the federal government. And Musk was one of them. His so-called Department of Government Efficiency is not a department at all. Departments can only be created by acts of Congress, and Congress has never created a Department of Government Efficiency, which historian Heather Cox Richardson doesn't call Doge, but rather Dog-E, which I think is perfectly appropriate.
Some of my listeners call it dodgy.
He is simply an advisor to Trump, and Trump has given him powers that are generally unconstitutional. And many of them are getting changed over time. There are so many people who have been tearing their hair out about what President Trump and Mr. Musk have done. But in fact, a good chunk of what they've done is slowly unraveling because it just conflicts with the United States Constitution, and it's simply not going to take place over the long run. But that's not what Trump cares about. What he cares about is making headlines in the short run. And the headlines that say the Department of Government Efficiency comes in and slashes jobs or something like that, that makes the headlines. The follow-up 3 weeks later when some court says, no, you're not going to do that, that doesn't work, that doesn't make the headlines nearly as easily. So Trump and Musk are doing a lot less than they claim to be doing. The courts are slow. They have to be slow. It's just in the nature of the judicial process, but they do act. The real question here is when they do act, are we, or perhaps when are we, going to see a time when the President of the United States refuses to accept a court order? It's probably only a matter of time.
Well, you know, somebody asked him, not that I believe anything that comes out of his mouth, but somebody asked him recently, will you obey the orders of the court? And he was like, oh, sure. No, of course I will. No problem. And yet his quote-unquote border czar, Tom Homan, said unequivocally, you know, we don't care what the courts rule. We're going to do what we want to do. So which is it, Marjorie?
Well, they're clearly doing whatever they can get away with. Who knows what they want to do? I mean, I think Trump's only goal is attention from everybody directed to him all the time. I don't think he has any particular interest in any policy. Goodness knows he's been on multiple sides of virtually any major policy over the last 20 or 30 years. But I think that it's certainly the case that Trump has shown he's going to try to, as Steve Bannon has expressed it, and I'm going to use a euphemism here because we're on public radio waves, to flood the zone with the S word. Just throw as much as you can at people as often as you can, because then reporters can't possibly keep up. You can't be a fact checker for Donald Trump when he is lying 35 times a day. It's just a full-time job. And there are other things happening in the world that need attention. So that's what he's doing. He's trying to basically intimidate people by flooding the zone as much as he can. But what happens at the end of that time is that he will get 1 or 2 or 3 of those things out of the 35 that he's thrown out that day, and he'll consider that a victory. It's not that he expects that he's going to get away with this. He doesn't have a clue what he's going to get away with. He just knows that if he keeps spreading all this stuff out there, that 1 or 2 things will sneak through, and that will be a win for him, and winning is what he cares about.
I was really amazed after he and J.D. Vance ambushed Volodymyr Zelensky in what was supposed to be just a simple photo op, and they started going after him. After it was over and still on camera, Trump mused to the room in general, well, that's going to make great television.
What an accomplishment. You can make great television by, defecating in front of a camera. I mean, that's fairly easy, which, metaphorically Trump does all the time. He's particularly interested in himself, and we have managed somehow to let him reach the top of his level of incompetence, and we are kind of stuck until he leaves the scene. But that's not going to be that long.
I hope you're right. I really do. I've talked to people.
The guy's mortal, as far as I know. I mean,
one thing about that, though, do you think that it is the obvious, natural successor to Trump is going to be J.D. Vance, or when Trump is out of the question, is it going to be a free-for-all? Because J.D. Vance scares me.
J.D. Vance is a relative newbie in politics, and he shows it all the time. He makes newbie mistakes all the time. And whenever he does, Trump distances himself from Vance because Trump doesn't want anybody else to share the spotlight. And as a consequence, think of Mike Pence, it's poor Mike Pence. He was Trump's choice. He is off in Siberia right now. This is what's going to happen to J.D. Vance. It happens to anybody who gets close to Trump. It'll be what happens to Musk once he is no longer useful as a shield, once he's done enough damage, and Trump can then blame Musk for being the one who did the damage. Once we begin to see just how damaging it is, once the impact of those tariffs start to take hold, once we begin to see that if you deport lots of people who clean the bathrooms in motels and who wash the dishes in restaurants, that you don't have enough people who clean the bathrooms in motels and wash the dishes in restaurants. And so Florida at the moment is actually trying to loosen laws that limit youth employment to make up for the deportation of so many people who took jobs that are not now being filled.
Here's how I think
this is a hard learning experience.
You could say that. Here's how I think it's going to play out. I think you're right. I think when people really start feeling the damage in their own personal lives, I think he does have Musk in a position where he can be made the scapegoat. But I don't think it's going to be like normally. I don't think it's going to be just like a you're fired. I think it's going to be because Musk, of course, has so much money to give him. Oh, my God, he's such a great guy. He meant to do the right thing. He was really trying to do right by this country. He's taken it's been such a personal cost to him that, of course, I understand he's going to step back from Doge. And, we're still going to be efficient. But, Elon's just been the best. He's contributed so much. What a great guy. Let's all wish him well. Elon, bye-bye. I think what you're saying is exactly right. He is disposable, but it will be the kindest, gentlest sort of firing I think we've ever seen from Donald Trump.
Yeah, well, Trump doesn't really do his own firing. He leaves the dirty work to other people. But Vance is another one who is going to have one of those don't let the door hit you on your way out of the room whenever Trump needs a scapegoat for something else. It's very dangerous to get too close to Donald Trump. Because he has no one's interest in mind but his own. And people who expect that they are going to rise in American politics and society as a result of staying close to him, after a while, people begin to learn, oops, that didn't work very well. Maybe I'd better stay away. And we're beginning to see that now.
Marjorie Hershey, professor of political science at Indiana University, Bloomington. The time always flies when we're together. Thank you so much for joining me.
You are most welcome. Take good care.
You too. Well, that is going to wrap things up for me today. Patty has a really interesting guest list coming up after the news. Reed McCollum is going to be with her, chair of the Democratic Party of DuPage County, and Sarah Garza Resnick, CEO of Personal PAC. It's going to be a really interesting political talk on Patty's show tonight, like I said, coming up just after the news. Tomorrow, by the way, if I may give you a little bit of a preview, we are going to be talking in part with Tony Fitzpatrick, who, as you know, artist, actor, poet, and Mark Turcott, who teaches at DePaul University and is also a Native American, Indigenous American poet. We are going to talk about the arts and how maybe in these horrible times, these horrible, horrible, stressful times, maybe the arts are going to be a big help in getting us through and keeping us sane and keeping us human. Really looking forward to that talk tomorrow. Plus, we've got Pet of the Month, and who doesn't like that segment? Of course, tomorrow's Friday, the first half of the show. We're going to be taking your calls and reading your texts. So I look forward to that. And remember our May 3rd event, because I'm still getting people from time to time reaching out about this, our anniversary broadcast from Max and Benny's in Northbrook. It's on a Saturday. It's sold out. It is sold out, but we hope that you will tune in. From 11 a.m. till 3 p.m., we're going to be on the air. Hal Sparks is going to do the first 2 hours. Patty, Richard, Scott Duff, and me are going to do the second 2 hours. Plus, we're going to have special guests and some sound clips that we are going to be sharing with you. Okay, you've got your marching orders. Have a great evening, my friends. I'll see you tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Good night.